Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Star Trek III, The Search for Spock. This video is part of a series of videos where I review every Star Trek film in order, 1 week at a time. For this video, I will cover The Search for Spock. So, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock is an interesting movie because I always consider it one of my favorite films. One of my favorite Star Trek films of all time. In fact, at one point, I would actually say this was my favorite Star Trek film when I was a teenager, but really I always went back and forth between this and Wrath of Khan, and I basically considered it a tie that they were both like the best because I was in love with both of these films. However, in more recent years and later years, I come to realize that Star Trek II is a better film than Star Trek III, and it does have Star Trek III does have some flaws, whereas Star Trek II is nearly flawless. But I still love it. It's still, I would even say that it is still my second favorite Star Trek movie ever made. I think it is better than Star Trek VI, Star Trek, First Contact, better than Star Trek IV, and way better than those stupid reboots. Even Star Trek Beyond, which I liked. So yeah, I absolutely love this film, but most people don't feel that way. In fact, of course, you heard the common trope about how the even number Star Trek films are good and the odd numbers are bad. And I never agreed with that trope because of this film. I was like, well, you can't say that because Star Trek 3 is the best, one of the best. It's the second best, and you can't say that the odd number films are bad. And I don't understand why people still say that, because Star Trek 2009, even though I think it's a piece of shit, that's an odd number film, but everyone loves it. And Star Trek, and they don't like it better than Into Darkness, which is an even number film. And they hate Star Trek Nemesis, think that's total piece of shit, and that's an even number film. But and Star Trek Generations is okay. I don't think it's that bad. But even if you just look at the original 6 and say, oh, okay, it just applies to the original 6, then, alright, Star Trek Motion Picture, Star Trek 5, okay, I can see. But Star Trek 3 breaks that mold. And that way, I think the whole mold, that model of even number good and odd numbers are bad, is nonsense. It doesn't hold up. Now, it's funny because I made a list once of my top 100 favorite movies of all time, and I still have that up on IMDb that has my top 100 favorite movies of all time, and I showed it to a bunch of friends, and they all had specific things that they pointed at. I'm like, oh, that movie sucks, why'd you put that there, or whatever, and everyone had a different take, but there was one guy in particular who pointed out Star Trek 3. He's like, that was the thing that stuck out the most to me. He's like, why the hell, Star Trek 3 was a piece of shit, how would you put it up there, that's ridiculous. I cannot disagree more. I actually think this is a really high quality film. Now, it does have its flaws, yes, but it's a lot of fun. Now, some of it can look back as campy, and maybe I got my nostalgic goggles on because I watched this as a teenager, so I'm more willing to forgive some of its cheesiness. But I still think it works as a classic 80s adventure film. It works even better than Wrath of Khan in terms of adventure, not in terms of an entire story, because it is a lot more sort of fun and out there, and there's a lot of things about this film that really work, like seeing Kirk, defy, his Starfleet command, steal the Enterprise, and team up with the other crew. And I think this film showcases the other crew that we don't get to see much. And most especially the other films, like we see Uhura, even though she is absent for most of the film, she has her big moment where she tricks that guy, and then Scotty, of course, has his big moment where he sabotages the other ship, and Sulu even has his moment where he kicks this guy's ass for calling him tiny, and Chekhov, of course, he's there throughout, almost plays a bigger role on the bridge. So I like that. I like it as more of an ensemble, and it shows them together. And plus, this is the film that really solidified the Klingon culture as we know it, or at least as we knew it before Discovery came along. But I'm not getting into that. But whenever you think of Klingons in Star Trek, you think of how they're portrayed in Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager, and that all began here. with this film, because before this film, the Klingons were very disjointed. They were never portrayed in the same way. They were just the stereotypical adversary. Whenever the original series needed an adversary, they just get this guy. Sometimes they would act like Ferengi and be like scheming about profit, and other times you'd be like, "Ha, my dear Captain Kirk." That's not what Klingons are what we think of now. And so they didn't really decide what the Klingon... And you could say, like, the motion picture was the first time we saw the ridges, and that's when they invented the Klingon language. But they barely appeared in the motion picture, and plus they looked a little bit different. In this film, they really solidified. They really made it firm, and they further developed the language because they had a lot more scenes in Klingon. And so... yeah, so this is responsible for giving us the Klingons, in my opinion. And on top of that, it was just a really great adventure going to the Genesis planet where it's falling apart, and they had to rescue hostages after they stole the Enterprise, and they had, we see other Starfleet captains. We get to see the Starbase, which becomes a staple in Star Trek in the future. This was a different Starbase than the one we saw in the motion picture, because that one was more based on reality. Like, they had NASA scientists come in, what would a space station actually look like? But here I think they realized reality doesn't actually look as cinematic as pleasing to the eye. So like, now fuck it, let's just make a little bulb thing. I mean, that's what the Enterprise was basically. So it, even though it may be less realistic, it fits into the Star Trek world better, and so that became a staple of Star Trek. That's what Starbases look like now. That started here, and we get to see the Excelsior and different times of new ships. It shows that we're going forward with ships, and just a lot of this stuff worked. Plus, we see the death of Kirk's son, which I do have some issues with, which I'll get into later. But this will form the basis of Star Trek 6. Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country, doesn't so much have as much to do with the other Star Trek films as some of the other ones, but it does take a lot from this film, and it turns that into a plot point, which I'll get more into when I get to that film. But Kirk he had a lot of encounters with the Klingons, but he didn't have this inherent hatred towards them until this scene, until the way that Kruge has treated him in this thing and killed his son. So there was a major jumping point that Star Trek films would later use. So yeah, I always really liked this film. Now, you could, the obvious criticism about this film is that, well, it's just a way to bring Spock back to life after they killed him, and yeah, of course. But I think I think the way they did that made total sense, and it was very adventurous. They made the best out of the characters to do it, so I don't mind. Now, the obvious, parody that I've seen a billion times, which, to be fair, might have to do with other movies as well, but I always think of this film as, they say, the search for more money. In fact, there was even a project to make a Spaceballs 2. I don't know if it will ever happen, but the working title for that is the Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money, and that's obviously a play. And I've heard people even refer to this film as Star Trek 3, The Search for More Money. But I think that's a bit ridiculous, because all films, especially sequels, are the search for more money. That doesn't mean they can't be good, and that doesn't mean they shouldn't exist, which I think that implies. Oh, they're just searching for more money. There's no reason that... It's like you say with, say, Star Trek 2009, it's just a cheap cash grab with no artistic value, but Star Trek 3 is not that. It has a lot of inherent, it really builds a character, it builds a world, and it's fun to watch. It's action adventure. I don't mind that it's a bit cheesy. Like the scene at the end, to me, is iconic. I mean, this movie came out before Die Hard, when, Die Hard has the iconic scene when Hans Gruber is thrown off the building and he falls, but they did it first. Oh, I'm sure tons of movies done this, but this is kind of iconic the way they do it here, where Kirk has that classic line of going, "I have had enough of "You!" and then kicks Kirk off. That is so great, and Shatner's cheesy line delivery actually really helps it. I like the fact that it's a bit campy, that it's a bit cheesy. It makes it classic to me, and I think this film really works in that regard. Now, I also got to bring up the Seinfeld episode, because they had the Seinfeld episode come out, which was in the 90s, so it was about a decade after this film was released, but it was right around the time where I first got into this film and Wrath of Khan, watching them repeatedly, so I really appreciate it. It's about I think it was Jerry quoted something about from Star Trek 2. She's not really dead if we still remember her, saying her instead of him, because it was about Susan dying, whatever, George's fiance that he was never really liked, and because of that, her parents made George do all this stuff, and so he got really pissed off. And playing the Wrath of Khan, they even had the thing where he went Khan, yelling, which was funny. But the main point is, in the same episode, Kramer brought up the Katra and said that to Susan's parents. They're talking about, the Katra, the living soul. And he kept saying, oh, that's from Star Trek 3. It was the best Star Trek film. That's the better Star Trek film. Whereas Jerry was saying Star Trek 2, The Wrath of Khan, was obviously the best Star Trek film. So I don't think they ever confronted each other, but they went around saying that. So even them had that same internal monologue that I was having, where it was like, Star Trek 2 is better, no, Star Trek 3 is the best, which is what I think it comes down to. Personally, that was always my internal monologue as well. And yeah, you had the plot with the Grissom, the science ship. Again, it expands the world. You get the Grissom, you get the Excelsior. The Grissom was interesting because we see a totally different kind of captain. Because you have to remember, back in this point in Star Trek lore, because now in Star Trek we've seen tons and billions of captains, but in the original series we got a couple here and there, but we didn't really get to see them on their own ship doing their own thing, and we got a bit of that with Captain Terrell in Star Trek 2, and I like that we get it even an even different perspective here with this tight-ass captain who's like, by the rules, by the book, we have to be safe. And I love, that's an interesting contrast to Saavik's character, because she was a by the book, by the rules in Star Trek 2, and now she's loosened up because of Kirk, and now she's dealing with someone who is by the books, and it's interesting that she's actually grown more to be more sort of reckless like Kirk, which I think was really interesting. Now, we get into the fact they couldn't get, obviously, I don't know if it was a decision to write Carol Marcus out of the script or that they couldn't get the actress, but I think it definitely suffers by not having her there, because obviously she would be there just studying the Genesis planet, because she created it. She was the main scientist. David was just supporting her. So it's a bit ridiculous that he's there and she's not. I think the novelization, someone might say this in the comment section, so I'll just point out that I'm already aware. The novelization does make an excuse, explains the way that she had moral objections to them going back to the Genesis planet and didn't want to go, and begged David not to, but he went anyway. Which, okay, that's something the novel adaptation of films often do. They find plot points or things done out of production necessity, like they couldn't get the actress, so they couldn't have her in, so the novelizations always make excuses or whatever. And you could say that, but that's not canon. But I still find it a bit ridiculous that she wasn't there, even if you can say the excuse, oh, she had moral objections or whatever. But it really would have benefited the film had she been there. Plus, they even had to have rechanged the Genesis thing because they couldn't use her image in this film, so they had to have Kirk, read the Genesis thing that Cruge sold, and like, when did Kirk have time to record this? But anyway, regardless, or the two versions out there, one with her and one with Kirk, but why would Kirk be narrating? I mean, they should have at least had David do it. They still have him, but regardless, of course, I'm overlooking the main cast change here, which is Saavik, who was played by Kirstie Alley in Star Trek 2, and here played by a different actress who Not as good. I'm not going to beat around the bush. She's not very good in this role. She did actually appear in Star Trek Next Generation episodes later. I think it was Gambit, where she played a Romulan, and she actually did a good job there. But that was like over a decade later. So I think she'd become a better actress by that stage. Here, she's obviously and more familiar with Star Trek probably too. Where here, I don't think she gets the nuance of how to play Vulcan, especially not as well as Kirstie Alley. Now, Kirstie Alley did have, it was because of contract disputes. She wasn't signed on to do sequels of Star Trek, so she could renegotiate her contract. And of course, she asked for more money than they're willing to give. I read somewhere they said, "Oh, she asked for too much money, so they weren't gonna." But that's actually putting your opinion into it. Do you know it's too much? Because that's really just the studio's opinion. Maybe she deserved a pay raise. Maybe she deserved more money, and the studios were kind of trying to screw her. So she was right in not coming back, especially because of what a great job she did. But regardless, she's not there. And we have this other actress playing Saavik, and it does really make it hard to buy that it's the same character because it's such a different character trait. And she, as I said, she doesn't do nearly as good of a job. Now, speaking of novelization versions, like in Star Trek, the novelization of Star Trek 2, they describe Saavik as half Romulan, half Vulcan. But that's clearly not the case in the films. They didn't actually establish canon. That's just non-canon stuff they do for fun. They never play her as half Romulan in the films, and especially in this film, she comes off as really, really deadpan Vulcan. Apparently, that is how Leonard Nimoy directed her. So it's very clearly not the case in the films. But also, talking about novelizations, apparently, in the scene, which, when I look at it, the scene doesn't really make that much sense. When Spock goes to Pungfar, because his body is aging. But his body, goes from being an infant to, however old he is. I know some nerd might tell me in the comment section, but however old he is at this stage. So, and if he goes to the Pungfar every 7 years, wouldn't he be doing it, every couple minutes? I mean, how often did she have to have sex with him? But regardless, we get a scene, they do the little finger thing, which we've seen Sarek and his wife do in the original series, so that's their version of kissing, apparently the Vulcan version of kissing, and it's implied that they get it on. So in the novelization, it was actually a thing in the Star Trek 4 novel. In fact, I believe this was going to be a plot point for Star Trek 4 that they abandoned, that Saavik would be pregnant with Spock's child. And so that's why she doesn't go with them to Earth, if you notice at the beginning. And I'll get to this more when I get to Star Trek 4, because this could be plot convenience because they didn't want her in the film. So it's like, oh, I'm staying on Vulcan. But originally the excuse for her staying on Vulcan would be because she's pregnant. And some people could say that actually was the case. I'm not sure, there might be some Star Trek novel that actually says, oh, she has Spock's son and shows what become of it. But again, that's not canon. That's not, nothing like that happens in the film. Plus, I don't think that's, even though that was their original idea, I don't think that's what, because originally in Star Trek 6, the character of I can't even remember her name, because I'll get to it when I get to Star Trek 6. But the Vulcan not mentor, but apprentice that Spock was her mentor, that was supposed to be Saavik, but I don't know if they couldn't get the actress or they just changed their mind. They just wanted to go with a different actress, I think. But it was originally supposed to be Saavik, and spoilers for Star Trek 6, but come on. She betrays Spock and goes along with the conspiracy. And again, I'll cover this more when I get to Star Trek 6. But if that was Saavik, then, and she had Spock's kid, then that would make no sense. That wouldn't really fit. She would have and plus she'd have a very different relationship with Spock if he was the father of her child. So that stuff is totally not canon, but it's interesting to think about. I mean, it does make logical, to catch a version, use the term, sense, since they did have sex here, especially if they had sex every couple of minutes. But I think that's a flaw, because would he really go through Pungfar if I don't know. But anyway, regardless of any of that, okay, so we get the death of David, and apparently they were going back and forth in the script who to kill, Saavik or David, and they decided to kill David because as punishment for using proto-matter in Genesis Planet, which is, I think, a stupid plot device. But anyway, it is interesting. I think it is better, as I said, that they killed David because it informs Kirk's character more, and again, it will become the basis of Star Trek 6. But yeah, I mean, if they killed Saavik, I don't see that as having as big of an impact on the show. And plus, they'd have to explain why David didn't go with them. So I just think it makes more sense all around. Now, as for the actual talking about pop culture references, this is another thing in the 90s. I think, and this is why I probably became a Star Trek fan. In the 90s, and most people might not realize it, but with alternative rock in the 90s, alternative rock is very, wide-spanning. Could be bands to Nirvana, REM, Duran Duran, anything but mostly 90s stuff. But in the 90s alternative culture, Star Trek was actually big. Like the radio station I used to listen to a lot that played all the modern 90s alternative rock would always make Star Trek parodies, and I think that's kind of why I got into Star Trek, because it was kind of trendy for, I was into the 90s alternative rock, and Star Trek for some reason, kind of similar to the way Lord of the Rings was big one of the hippies in the 60s, like the hippie music movement, even though J.R.R. Tolkien thought hippies had nothing to do with Lord of the Rings, and most people say Star Trek has nothing to do with 90s alternative rock, but for some reason that was a big thing. But the radio station I used to listen to, and they would have big concerts and festivals with all these bands playing, when the main themes was the Klingon bastards. They always, and in fact, there was a parody song, you could probably find it on YouTube, where this guy's makes a song out of it. It's now time for me to overact. You Klingon bastards, you killed my son. You Klingon bastard, you killed my... And just making fun of how overacted. And that was a thing that radio station would even put on its t-shirts to be you Klingon bastard. I remember that. So this was so they made this an iconic scene, which I love. And again, this is kind of the good cheesy, the good campy. I know it's a bit cheesy, I know it's a bit campy here as he falls out of his chair. He goes, you Klingon bastard, you killed my son. It's such obvious overacting, but I love it. I absolutely, totally love it. I wouldn't say it's a so bad as good situation, because I still think, I wouldn't say it's bad. It's cheesy, sure, but I do think it really works for the film overall. It does have that tone. It has more of that sort of lighthearted tone. Now, getting back to Cruise, who is actually played by Christopher Lloyd, which most people don't realize. I went and watched this movie in the 90s, and I was like, what? Christopher Lloyd played the Klingon? He played the first essential Klingon. Now, you might say, oh, he wasn't really acting like a Klingon because he was going off and doing his own thing and trying to kill Kirk. But I think side material for the movie explained this a bit more, that he was more of a pirate, a warlord, not an official in the official Klingon military. He was all had as a sort of own militia, a rogue faction. If you think of it in that terms, that actually does make a lot of sense, and also shows why he's way less honorable than a lot of other Klingons we meet, even in later original series films like Star Trek 6. So I think that does make a lot of sense why he would do that. But Christopher Lloyd, he's usually a comedic actor, and he plays a totally evil dude, and I think he does a good job. Again, some people might say find it a bit cheesy, over the top, but I think it is in a way that really works for the film. which I think is great. But this leads to one of the big nitpicks I have about this film, is his motivation doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, because he keeps saying to Kirk, "Give me Genesis." I mean, all right. First of all, if he like says, "Oh, we'll go to the Genesis planet to seek the power, to find the secrets." If he really wanted to find the secret of the Genesis weapon, he would go to like the regular one, to the lab, which apparently was like everyone was killed, so it might be abandoned, not protected as much. Or did he go to some other Star Trek, Starfleet research station that has like the data or the information, or maybe try to, he used the black market in order to get that little video with Kirk that he watched. Maybe use the black market to try to get more data, or maybe use well, how's that said? He's probably not in the military, which is why he couldn't use official like espionage or Klingon intelligence, because he's probably not associated with that governmental agencies. But still, there's better ways of doing it. Why does he go to the Genesis planet? What kind of secret does he expect to get? I mean, really, he wants the blueprints of the weapon, how to create the weapon, just by going to the planet, which is just the result of the weapon. How the fuck does he really expect to find the secret to the weapon? And what's even worse is when he's on the planet and he's yelling at Kirk and he's like, "Give me Genesis." It's like, what does he expect Kirk to do? Does he expect Kirk to go, "Oh, yeah, sorry, I have it here in my back pocket. Here you go, here's Genesis"? I mean, what does he expect Kirk to give him? I don't understand. So, that part of it was really stupid. But, getting back to more of the positives, I do like the way that they destroyed the Enterprise. How they had a confrontation with the clans, which is really intense. And it is sort of hard to believe that there were only like 15 Klingons on board, but I guess you could say he is a rogue fashion or whatever. But and it was cool, even though there's a universal translator, so they should realize what a counting down clock would mean. Kruge did, but the other Klingons apparently were idiots, because, "Oh, I don't know what this could mean." And Kruge, instead of yelling, get out of there," why doesn't it actually walk over to the transporter station and beam them out of there instead of just yelling, "Get out"? But whatever. Anyway, that was cool, though. I did like it, and I did like how Kirk had to sacrifice the Enterprise, and that was a big moment. And this is something that later Star Trek would ruin. Now, when the Enterprise destroyed, it's like just another day. It's just eating breakfast. It's just monotonous. "Oh yeah, that's the Enterprise destroyed. We know they're just gonna make another one." Like in Star Trek Generations, like they made a big deal out of it crashing on the planet. In the next Star Trek movie, there's just a new Enterprise. They don't even explain. They don't even make a big deal. It's like, and it's even worse in Star Trek Beyond, which again I do like that film, but they destroy it and there's a new one by the end of it. It's just like, who cares if it's destroyed? But it still meant something in this film. That was a very powerful scene. Watching the Enterprise burn up in the atmosphere really choked me up, because that was an iconic ship. And even though they did get a replacement at the end of Star Trek 4, that was still a while away, and it was never the same. They even said that it's not the same. Like, it's sort of letting go of your past. And I love that. I love that Kirk was willing to make that sacrifice, and then we get to see it explode in the atmosphere like that. So that was great. And I already talked about how him like starting a mutiny and getting everyone together. Like, that was a great ensemble thing, and it was great that he had to defy. I mean, I think this is the only time we really see Kirk do something like that. And Insurrection was such a cheap imitation of that. Damn it. It was just, again, that was like fake stakes, but again, I'll cover that more when I get to Insurrection. This is what it done right. This is a classic film that many films just try to emulate but can't. Now, real quick, I want to talk about the Klingons again, because these were originally meant to be Romulans. Like, the script was originally written as the Romulans. And it was a totally different idea to begin with, where the Romulans were mining Genesis and then animated body of Spock was going around killing them, and it was more of a political confrontation. They described the main Romulan villain as more of a, calculated type, similar to the Romulan clan commander in Balance of Terror. And I dare say that sounds like a better movie, but I'm still very happy with what we got here. But apparently, the changing it from to the Klingons was something the studio insisted on because the Klingons were well known. They appeared in more episodes and they were in the motion picture. So I thought, people are more familiar with the Klingons, but they had already, when they created the Klingon bird of prey, which later becomes the classic bird of prey, which is in Next Generation Deep Space. Now all other incarnations of Trek, this is a classic Klingon ship. But it was made to be a Romulan ship, and so it was made. That's why it was painted like a bird, because the Romulan ship in Balance of Terror was painted like a bird. It was going to be a bird of prey, and it was going to be a Romulan ship. But they already decided to switch to the Klingons, and they couldn't be bothered making another ship. So they're like, "Oh, we'll just make this." So it's funny to think that what we think of as the classic Klingon ship was originally intended to be a Romulan ship. Which I think that's really interesting. But we get more, another reason why I love this film is we get a lot of cool Kirk scenes that aren't in very many other films, like when he goes aboard the Klingon ship and he asks the Klingon there to help him. He's like, "I do not deserve to live," which again sounds more like the Klingons we know. But and he says, "Fine, I'll kill you later." And then so later they get the ship working, and he's like, "Oh, take the Klingon below," and he's like, "You said you'd kill me." And he's like, "I lied." That's such great Kirk. That's like the opposite of the Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, when he was like, he said this guy, "I like you, I'll kill you last," and he ends up killing him first. And right before he's gonna die, he's like, "Wait, you said you killed me last?" And Arnold Schwarzenegger goes, "I lied." So this is kind of the opposite of that, where Kirk is like, "Well, I lied when I said I'd kill you." Which is cool because that's so true to Kirk's, Starfleet mentality, but it's done in the smart-ass, badass Kirk fashion, which is great. So then the film ends with this whole sequence on Vulcan with Spock being revised, and I must admit it is kind of anticlimactic. It is kind of a slow way to end this action-packed film, and apparently the studio was very much against this and wanted Leonard Nimoy to change it, but he was very adamant. He fought tooth and nail apparently against the studio that it had to end with Spock being revised on Vulcan. Now let me. And so the scene was actually touching at the end when Spock, is revised and he says, "Ship out of danger." Kirk's like, "You saved the ship. You saved it all." But that was a touching. That was a touching scene. I did like that, but it did go on for a bit too long with the Vulcan doing the Vulcan. And he's like, what's going to happen. Spock's going to bring him back to life because they're not going to say, "Oh no, we can't do it. Spock and McCoy are dead. Aha, everything was a waste." That's not how the movie's going to end. So they should have just got to the point. But all right, now I'm going to get to the last nitpick I have about this film that really bothers me is when they bring, Spock at the end to the Vulcan, whatever, and she says, "Oh, this hasn't been done in thousands of years. What you ask isn't logical." What? Then, if that's the case, how come at the start of the film, Saavik went to Kirk? It's like, why did you leave Spock in Genesis? Didn't you know you can take him back and bring him back to life? And then Saavik even said, it is the Vulcan way to mind meld with someone and put their katra into someone before they die. Yet, here we say, it hasn't been done for thousands of years, and even then it's legend. So why then does Saavik assume, and he even says that to Kirk, why do you assume? Well, he assumes that Spock would do this thing that hasn't been done for thousands of years, and it was just legend. That is some grade A horseshit right there. And I do understand people's complaints that this undermines death. Oh, Vulcans can't die. All they have to do is go woo. But if you say it's just legend, it's thousands of years, then it does make it a bit more palatable because it's not something that's commonly done, and it's seen as a out there thing. But then they should have fixed the scene with Saavik because he was acting like it was like the natural conclusion. Well, duh, of course you put the Katra in there, but that makes no fucking sense. But anyway, I really love this film. So my rating for Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock, out of 10 is a 10, the best. I absolutely love this film. It is fun. Even though it's cheesy at times, I think the cheese adds to the fun, not detracts. It's not distracting. It's not bad. It's just a fun film. Love Christopher Lloyd as the main Klingon, and I think he serves the purpose he's meant to serve because he's not a three-dimensional character, but he's not meant to be because the point of the film isn't the Klingons. And I think they make. In later films, the villains often distract from the main story, where here I think they serve the purpose they're meant to serve by pushing the main story along with it, which is a character story, with Kirk coming to terms with trying to put everything at risk, like his ship, his son, in order to save his comrade. And that heart really shines through in the whole film, especially when he defies Starfleet. And it's very reminiscent, too, of Kirk defying Starfleet to save his friend, of Spock defying Starfleet to save Captain Pike in the episode The Menagerie, which I just reviewed. So it's a great Star Trek film, great character story, and highlights all the characters too, like Horror, Scotty. They all have their moments, and it has a heart at it, and an adventure, and I love the cheese. I've had enough of you. Anyway, that is it for my review of Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. I will be back here in a week to review Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home. And you can keep an eye on my channel as I do many more Star Trek videos, as well as many other videos and shows like The Expanse, Game of Thrones, Babylon 5, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.